My brother accidentally backed his SUV into my $7,500 hot tub because I refused to pay for his $22,000 home renovation. Guess I misjudged the distance, he smirked. My dad said, "You know how he gets when he hears no." I did not react. That evening, I removed my name from the loan I had co-signed for him and froze the $9,000 I had set aside to help. But the real shock came at 7:20 a.m. when he found a notice taped to his front door. The sound was not a crash. It was slower than that. A low grinding push, then a crack, then the wet snap of the acrylic shell giving way under the weight of a Chevy Tahoe rolling backward at idle speed. I was standing at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee in my hand and my tape measure clipped to my belt the way it has been clipped every morning since I was 18 years old. The tape measure was the first thing I bought with my own paycheck as a construction apprentice. Yellow housing, cracked on one side, still retracts clean after 16 years. My first boss handed me a framing square on my first day and said, "Measure twice, cut once, and never put your name on something you didn't build." I have carried those words and that tape measure every day of my career. Through the window, I watched my brother Brock's black Tahoe push through the wooden deck frame around my hot tub and keep going until the front edge of the tub crumpled inward like a crushed soda can. Water shot sideways across the concrete pad in a wide fan and ran down the slope toward the garden. The tub was a $7,500 Marquis Signature Series I had installed the previous spring. 6 jets, cedar surround, dedicated 240-volt line I ran myself. It was the one thing in my backyard that I had built for no reason other than wanting it. Brock put the Tahoe in park. He climbed out with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the collapsed hot tub the way a man looks at a parking meter he accidentally bumped with his door. Not surprised. Not sorry. Measuring whether anyone was going to make him pay for it. Water was still draining across the concrete, pooling around the cracked cedar planks, soaking into the soil of the garden bed I had planted along the fence line in September. My neighbor Perry Whitfield was standing in his driveway 12 feet away holding a leaf blower. He had watched the entire thing, start to finish. He saw the Tahoe start, reverse, accelerate across 40 feet of open driveway, cross the lawn, break through the wooden surround, and crush the shell. His mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. He looked at me through the kitchen window. I looked at him. He shook his head slowly. Neither of us said anything because there was nothing to say about something that deliberate. Brock walked to my back door, which was unlocked because I had been carrying lumber in from my truck all morning, and opened it without knocking. He stood in my kitchen with his boots still on and his keys in his hand, and he said, "Guess I misjudged the distance." He did not misjudge anything. 3 weeks earlier, I told him I would not pay $22,000 for his kitchen and bathroom renovation. He had been unemployed since March, living off credit and the mortgage I had co-signed for him in April of 2025. He came to me with a quote from a contractor I had never heard of, $22,000 for a kitchen gut and a bathroom remodel. I am a licensed general contractor. I run a 2-man firm with my partner Felix Navarro. Callaway Navarro Construction. 12 years in business. I know what a kitchen renovation costs in this market, and it is not $22,000 for the scope of work Brock described. The real number was closer to $11,000 to $13,000 depending on finishes. Brock had either been given a padded quote or he was planning to pocket the difference. Either way, I said no. He did not take it well. He never takes it well. And now my hot tub was a pile of cracked acrylic and splintered cedar leaking onto my patio. I almost swung at him. I almost set down my coffee and walked across that kitchen and put my hands on my brother the way I had wanted to since we were teenagers, and he broke my model truck because I beat him at a card game. But the tape measure was on my belt, the weight of it pulling my hip the way it does every morning, and the weight reminded me of something my first boss said that Brock never learned. You do not fix a problem by making a bigger one. You should leave, I said. It's a hot tub, Reed. You'll survive. He left. Perry came over 10 minutes later. He had seen everything from his driveway, start to finish. He told me he would write a statement if I needed one. I told him I might. That afternoon, I filed a property damage report with the county sheriff's office. Perry submitted a written witness statement describing what he saw. The Tahoe starting, reversing, accelerating across 40 feet of driveway, and crushing the hot tub. The deputy assigned a case number and told me the report would be on file if I pursued a civil claim or if my insurance needed documentation. The hot tub case stayed separate from everything that came after. That evening, my father Stan hosted a dinner at his house the way he does every other Saturday. He lives 4 miles from me in the house I grew up in. I went because I go every time. Brock was already there. So was Brock's wife Kendra, two of Brock's drinking buddies from his old job, my cousin Dale, and Perry, who Stan had invited because Perry had helped him fix a fence the week before. The hot tub came up before the plates were cleared. "Reed," Stan said, leaning back in his chair with a beer in his hand, "you know how Brock gets when he hears no. He's always been like that. You boys need to work this out." He backed his truck into my hot tub. He misjudged the distance. He put his truck in reverse, crossed 40 feet of driveway, went through a wooden surround, and crushed a 6-jet acrylic shell. That is not a misjudgment. That is a decision. Brock was sitting at the far end of the table with his arms crossed and a look on his face like he was watching someone complain about a parking ticket. That was when he said what he said, and he said it loud enough for every person in the room to hear. 22 grand is nothing to a guy who dropped 7,500 on a hot tub he sits in alone because his wife left. You swing a hammer and pour concrete and act like you built something. Callaway Navarro Construction. 2 guys and a truck. Dad had to co-sign your first business loan because no bank would touch you, and now you won't write a check for your own brother's house? I didn't misjudge the distance, Reed. I misjudged you. The room stopped. Kendra looked at the table. She set her fork down without finishing the bite she had been chewing. Perry, who had seen the Tahoe back into the hot tub that morning, looked at me with an expression that said he was waiting for me to say something and hoping I would not, both at the same time. Dale stared at his plate and did not look up. Stan said nothing. He just looked at me with the expression he has worn my entire life when Brock does something destructive and Stan decides the easier path is to pretend it was weather. Brock's 2 drinking buddies looked at each other, then at their beers, then at the door. I picked up my keys. I walked out. I did not answer, because there was nothing in that room worth answering. The tape measure was still on my belt. I drove home and sat in my truck in the driveway for 15 minutes, looking at the ruined hot tub through the headlights. The water had stopped draining. The shell was dark and cracked, and the cedar surround was splintered outward like someone had hit it with a battering ram, which is essentially what a Chevy Tahoe is when you point it at something and press the gas. I went inside and sat at my kitchen table, and I did not call anyone. I did not text anyone. I looked at the tape measure on my belt, and I started making a list. If you have ever watched someone destroy something you built with your own hands and then tell you it was your fault for having it, you know why I am telling you this story. Welcome to Betrayal Unfolded. Monday morning, I made 2 calls before I left for a job site. There is something I need to explain first. My brother Brock has been the kind of person who treats other people's stability as a resource for his own instability for as long as I can remember. When we were 22 and 26, he borrowed my truck without asking and returned it with the transmission grinding. He said it was like that when he picked it up. It was not. When I got married, he asked me for $3,000 2 weeks before the wedding because he was behind on his car payment. I gave it to him because our father told me that is what brothers do. When my wife left me 2 years ago, Brock did not call for 3 weeks. When he finally did, it was to ask if I could help him move a couch. That is who Brock is. He does not take. He assumes. He assumes that whatever you have is available because you have it and he needs it, and the distance between those 2 facts is your problem, not his. The first call was to the lender holding Brock's mortgage. I had co-signed the $185,000 refinance in April of 2025 because Brock's credit score was 588 and no bank would approve him a loan. I co-signed because Stan asked me to. He said, "Your brother needs this. He's trying to get his life together. You're the only one with the credit to help." I signed because I believed him. I believed that Brock was trying. I believed that a stable mortgage would give him a foundation to build on. I believed the same thing I always believe about Brock, which is that this time will be different. It was not different. I asked the lender what the process was for removing a co-signer. The loan officer made it clear. I could not simply remove my name from the mortgage, but I could file a formal co-signer release request and refusal of future accommodation, which would trigger a full credit review of the remaining borrower. If Brock could not qualify independently, the bank would not release me. But the failed review would put the loan on internal risk monitoring and block any further modification, renovation draw, or equity request. I submitted the paperwork that afternoon. Brock had been unemployed for 8 months. His credit score had dropped to 541. He would not qualify a loan. The review would expose every risk factor he had been hiding from the lender. The second call was to my own bank. I had a savings account with $9,000 I had been setting aside since September to help Brock with his renovation. Not the full $22,000 he demanded, but $9,000 in materials and labor I was going to contribute myself, at cost, using my own crew and my own time, pulling proper permits and scheduling proper inspections. Doing the work the right way because that is the only way I know how to do work. I transferred the $9,000 to my business operating account. The renovation fund was closed. The help was over. That should have been the end of it. The co-signer removal and the frozen money were proportional responses to a man who destroyed $7,500 of my property and smirked about it. I could have stopped there. But I am a licensed general contractor. And licensed general contractors check the city permit database the way other people check the weather. It is part of my morning routine. I log in, review active permits in my service area, check for new filings, and verify that nothing is listed under my license number that I did not authorize. On Tuesday morning, November 9, I logged into the city's online permit portal. I ran a search on my license number. 2 active permits came up. The first was a deck rebuild on Orchard Lane that Felix and I were finishing that week. The second was a permit application at 444 Birchwood Court. That was Brock's address. I clicked the permit. Applicant: Brock Calloway. Contractor of record: Reed Calloway. License #GC 2019-4471. Scope of work: kitchen renovation and bathroom remodel, including electrical panel upgrade and plumbing relocation. Filing date: October 28, 8 days before Brock backed his truck into my hot tub. My brother had taken my license number and put it on a building permit for a renovation I refused to pay for, performed by a crew I never hired, on a property I had no involvement with. He forged my credentials on a government filing. That is not a family disagreement. That is unauthorized use of a professional license, which in this state is a criminal misdemeanor and grounds for immediate license revocation if the board finds the licensee was complicit. If any of that shoddy work failed and someone was injured, the lawsuit would come to me. My insurance, my bond, my company. The company Felix and I had built over 12 years, starting with a borrowed truck and a $4,000 loan, would be exposed to liability for work I never touched. I sat at my desk and looked at the permit application on my screen for a long time. The tape measure was on the desk beside my coffee, the yellow housing with a crack on one side. 16 years. I had put my name on every job I ever built. I signed every permit I ever pulled. I stood behind every inspection I ever passed. And my brother put my name on something I would have failed on sight. I almost called Brock that morning to warn him. I almost picked up the phone and told him to pull the permit, fire the crew, and stop before the damage got worse. But I drove past Brock's house on my way to the Orchard Lane job, and I could see the renovation through the front window and the side window that faces the driveway. New cabinets, partially installed, sitting crooked on the wall. Exposed wiring running across the ceiling without junction boxes, visible through the front window. A plumbing stack through the side window that had been relocated without a proper vent, I did not need to enter the house to know the work was wrong. 3 code violations visible from the public sidewalk. I took photos from the sidewalk. Public right-of-way. Legal. That afternoon I showed Felix the photos and the permit filing. Felix has been my partner for 12 years. He is the one who loaned me $4,000 to buy our first work truck when I was 22 and broke. He is the one who drove me to the courthouse when my divorce was finalized and sat in the parking lot for 2 hours. Because he said, "You might need a ride home and you might need a beer, and I can provide both." Felix looked at the photos, then looked at the permit with my license number on it, and his face did something I had never seen. It went completely flat. No anger, no surprise, just the look of a man who builds things for a living staring at a forgery that could destroy everything we built together. If that electrical work fails inspection and someone gets hurt, your license is the one on the permit, he said. Your insurance. Your bond. Our company. I know. What are you going to do? Everything. Wednesday morning, I filed a formal complaint with the city building department. I reported the unauthorized use of my license number on the permit application at 444 Birchwood Court. I included the permit screenshot, my license card for signature comparison, and a statement confirming I had no involvement with the project, had never visited the site professionally, and had never authorized any person to use my credentials. That same morning, I filed a preemptive self-report with the State Contractor Licensing Board. I disclosed the forgery, attached the same documentation, and requested an investigation. The board representative told me that preemptive self-reporting is the single strongest protection a licensee can file. It establishes the timeline and removes any appearance of complicity. Thursday, I called my surety bond company and my liability insurer. I notified both that my credentials had been used without authorization on a project I did not supervise, did not inspect, and did not approve. The bond company opened a file and noted that any claim arising from work at that address would be contested as unauthorized use of the licensee's credentials. If you have ever built something with your hands and then watched someone attach your name to something you would never have built, you know the difference between a mistake and a forgery. Welcome back to Betrayal Unfolded. 5 days after the hot tub, Brock showed up at my house. He parked his Tahoe in the street this time, not the driveway, which told me he had started to understand that driveways were no longer safe territory. He knocked. I opened the door. He was wearing the expression he wears when he has practiced a speech in the car. Listen, the cosigner thing. I talked to the bank. They said the review flagged my credit. They put the loan on some kind of watch list. I can't get a modification. I can't draw equity. And they said if I don't get a job or refinance within 90 days, they're going to start asking questions I can't answer. I need you to call them and tell them you changed your mind. Who pulled the permit for your renovation? His face changed. Not all at once. It started at his jaw, which tightened. Then his eyes, which moved left, toward the street, toward the Tahoe, toward anything that was not my face. Then his hands, which went into his pockets the way they go when he is calculating how much trouble he is in. I hired a guy. He handled the permits. The permit has my license number on it, Brock, GC 2019-4471. That is my number. My name. My credentials on a project I never agreed to, never supervised, and never set foot on. If that electrical work starts a fire, my insurance pays. If that plumbing leaks into your foundation, my bond covers the claim. You did not just forge a permit, you put a target on everything I have spent 16 years building. He did not answer. He stood on my porch for a long time with his hands in his pockets and the November air pushing past him into my house. His mouth opened once, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Then he turned around and walked back to his Tahoe and drove away without closing my front door. I closed it myself. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and called Felix. On Friday, November 14th, at 7:20 a.m., a code enforcement officer from the city building department arrived at 414 Birchwood Court in a white municipal truck. He walked up the front path, removed a printed violation notice from a folder, and taped it to Brock's front door with clear packing tape. The notice listed 4 items: unpermitted electrical work performed without licensed supervision, non-compliant plumbing relocation without proper venting, unauthorized use of a licensed contractor's credentials on the permit application, and a stop work order effective immediately. Remediation or demolition of all non-compliant work was required within 30 days. Fines of $250 per day would begin accruing after the deadline. The total estimated remediation cost, if Brock hired a licensed crew to bring the work to code, was between $14,000 and $18,000. More than the renovation would have cost if he had let me do it for $9,000. Brock opened the door in a bathrobe. The officer took photographs of the visible exterior modifications, asked Brock to confirm he was the homeowner, handed him a copy of the notice, and told him the permit had been suspended pending investigation by the licensing board. Brock stood on his porch holding the notice with both hands while the officer walked back to his truck. Perry told me later that he could see Brock standing there from across the street for 10 minutes after the officer drove away, reading the document over and over. The way you read something when you are waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into a different meaning. They did not. The lender's notice arrived 3 days later. 90 days to refinance the $185,000 mortgage without a cosigner, or the loan would enter default review. Brock could not refinance. He was unemployed. His credit was 541, and his property now had an active code violation and a stop work order on file. No lender would touch it. On Saturday, November 22, I went to Stan's house for dinner. This time I brought Felix, not because I needed backup, because Felix's name is on the company too, and he had a right to be in the room when I explained what Brock had done to both of us. Brock was there with Kendra. Stan's neighbor couple, the Lindstroms, were on the patio with drinks. Dale was at the table. Brock tried to control the room before I sat down. Reed filed a complaint against me with the city, against his own brother, because I used his license number to pull a permit. That is what this family has come to. You did not use my license number, I said. You forged my license number on a government filing. There is a difference. Using implies permission. Forging implies a crime. Felix set a folder on the table. Inside was a printout of the permit application, a copy of my license card, and the photo I had taken of the renovation work visible through Brock's front window. Felix pointed at the permit. That is Reed's license number. That is not Reed's signature. I have worked beside Reed for 12 years, and I have seen his signature on 1,000 documents. That is not it. I looked at the room. At Kendra, who was staring at the permit printout. At the Lindstroms, who had stopped pretending to be interested in their drinks. At Stan, who was leaning back in his chair the way he leans when he is hoping the conversation will end before he has to participate in it. You attach my credentials to electrical work done without junction boxes and a plumbing stack with no vent. 3 code violations visible from the street without getting out of a truck. If that wiring fails and someone gets hurt, my name is on the permit, my insurance, my bond. The company Felix and I spent 12 years building. 2 guys in a truck, Brock. That is what you called us at this table 3 weeks ago. I looked at Stan. You said I know how he gets when he hears no. You said we should work it out. Dad, he forged my license. He put my name on work I would have failed on a first-year inspection. That is not hearing no. That is committing fraud and hoping I would not check. Stan's mouth opened. Then it closed. He looked at Brock the way you look at a problem you have been paying someone else to ignore, and the bill just arrived. 2 guys in a truck, I said, looking at Brock. That is what you called my company at this table 3 weeks ago. Those 2 guys in that truck are the reason you had a cosigner on your mortgage. Those 2 guys are the reason you had $9,000 waiting for you in a savings account that I set aside with my own money to help renovate your house the right way. 2 guys in a truck built everything you were standing in. Brock, the unlicensed crew you hired to do the work on my forged license, can't say the same. Brock started to speak. I was going to tell you about the permit. You were going to tell me after the inspection passed and my license absorbed the liability. That is not telling me. That is using me. I almost walked out of Stan's house before finishing. But the case number from the licensing board complaint was on my phone, and I had not said the last thing I came to say. You forged my license to pull a permit you couldn't get yourself. The city has the application. The board has my report. The lender has the code violation on file, and the bond company has denied coverage for any claim at your address. Every consequence you are facing right now started the day you put my name on a document I did not sign, not the day I reported it. Brock's hands came out of his pockets and went to the edge of the table. His fingers pressed into the wood until the tips turned white. His jaw was working side to side, but no words formed. His left knee buckled slightly, and he caught himself on the back of the chair. The color in his face drained from the forehead down, like watching paint thin on a wall. He sat down without meaning to, without catching himself. The way a person sits when the ground makes the decision for them. He looked at the table, and he did not look up again. Kendra was watching him. Her face had changed from confusion to something harder. The expression of a woman who has just realized that the renovation in her kitchen was not only unfinished, but illegal, and that her husband had lied to her about how it was being done. This is the last loan, I said. The last check. The last time I answer the phone when you need something built, paid for, or fixed. The $9,000 is gone. The cosigner is gone. The license is mine and it stays mine. You want a renovation? Hire a licensed contractor with your own money and pull your own permit with your own name on it. Kendra stood up. She picked up her purse from the counter. She looked at Brock. You told me you hired a licensed crew. You told me the permit was legitimate. Brock did not answer her. She walked out. Stan's neighbor couple looked at each other. The husband folded his napkin and set it on the table. They left through the side door without saying goodbye. 2 days later, Brock called me. His voice was different. Not the smirking voice. Not the reasonable voice. The cornered voice. If you don't pull the complaint, I'll call the licensing board myself and tell them you did substandard work on the Whitmore job last year. I'll tell them your foundation pour was off by 2 inches and you covered it up. The Whitmore job was a garage addition on the north side of town. The foundation was poured to spec, inspected twice, and signed off by the city. The inspection reports were in my filing cabinet. I looked at Brock through the phone the way I look at a wall that someone is telling me is straight when my level says it is not. I clipped the tape measure back on my belt. I said nothing. I hung up. The fallout came the way demolition comes. Not all at once, but in a sequence, each piece pulling the next one down. The code enforcement deadline passed on December 14. Brock had not remediated the work and had not demolished it. He could not afford to. A licensed crew to bring the electrical and plumbing to code would cost between $14,000 and $18,000, and he had no income, no credit, and no co-signer. Municipal fines began accruing at $250 per day after the deadline. By the end of December, the accumulated fines were $4,250 and climbing. After 30 days of unpaid fines, the city recorded a municipal lien against the property. The lien, combined with the active stop work order and the open code violations, made any refinance path impossible. No lender would underwrite a property with an active municipal lien and open building violations. The lender moved the loan to default review. Brock's $185,000 mortgage, the one I had co-signed because our father told me that is what brothers do, was now secured by a house worth less than its violations. Kendra filed for legal separation in the first week of December. She told Brock, according to what Felix heard from Dale, that she could not raise her children in a house with exposed wiring, a suspended permit, a code violation, a property lien, and a mortgage entering default review. She said, "You told me you hired a real crew. You told me the permit was legitimate. You told me your brother was being difficult for no reason. Every single thing you told me was a lie." She took the kids to her mother's house. Brock stayed in the house alone with the crooked cabinets and the non-compliant plumbing and the $250 per day fine clock running on the lean and the junction boxes he had wired in series because he could not tell the difference between series and parallel, which is the kind of detail that matters when you are pretending to be something you are not. Stan called me once, a week after the second dinner. He did not ask me to withdraw the complaint. He did not apologize for enabling Brock at the first dinner. He said, "Your brother is in over his head." I told him Brock has been in over his head his entire life, and Stan has been filling in the hole every time instead of teaching him to stop digging. This time the hole has a lien on it, I said, and a stop work order, and a licensing board investigation with possible referral to the city attorney. I did not put him there, Dad. He put himself there the day he decided my name was something he could borrow without asking. Stan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "He's still your brother." I told him that was exactly the problem. He did not call again. Brock tried to fix the electrical himself. He bought a box of junction boxes from the hardware store and spent a Saturday afternoon wiring them in. The following Monday, the building inspector came for a follow-up and found the work still non-compliant. Brock had wired the junction boxes in series instead of parallel. The inspector added a second violation to the file. And then there was the apology. Felix told me this because Brock called Felix one evening in late November, not me. Brock said he wanted to text me but did not know how to start. He said he had been staring at his phone for an hour. Felix said Brock read the first version of the message out loud. "I'm sorry about the hot tub and the license thing. Can we talk?" Then Brock said it sounded wrong, too casual, like apologizing for borrowing a tool without asking. He deleted it and started over. The second version was longer, something about how he had been under pressure since losing his job, and he did not mean for things to go this far, and he understood now that the license was serious, and he should not have done it. He stopped halfway through and said, "He won't read it anyway. He'll see my name and delete it." He deleted that version too. He started a third time. Felix said the line went quiet for nearly 2 minutes. Then Brock said, "I don't know how to say it. I don't think there's a way to say it that makes it smaller." And he hung up. The apology was never sent. The text was never written. The words stayed wherever words go when a person cannot find a way to make them true enough to let go of. Early December, a Saturday morning. The air was cold enough to see my breath, and the grass was stiff with frost. I was in my backyard with a tape measure and a chalk line, marking out the dimensions for a new patio where the hot tub used to sit. The concrete pad was clean now. I had spent the previous weekend breaking up the cracked acrylic and hauling the cedar to the dump. The space was empty, not damaged, just open, ready for something different. Felix pulled up at 8 a.m. with 2 sawhorses, a stack of pressure-treated lumber, and 2 cups of gas station coffee. We were going to build a fire pit and a seating area, not a replacement for what was destroyed. Something new in the space that used to hold something someone took from me. Felix set the sawhorses up and said, "You know, if he just asked you to do the renovation the right way, you would have done it for $9,000 and it would have passed inspection on the first walkthrough." I know. Instead, he spent more, got less, and lost his house. I know that too. If you or someone you know has ever had someone put your name on something you did not build and then blame you for not helping them do it, know this: your name is yours. Your license is yours. And the people who forge it are not family. They are liabilities. Thank you for listening. This has been Betrayal Unfolded. The tape measure clicked out to 48 inches. I marked the first post hole. Felix held the chalk line. The November sun was thin and pale, but it was enough. Through the fence, I could see the street. 3 blocks east, Brock's house sat with a stop work order on the door, a lien on the record, crooked cabinets visible through a window, and a rectangle of missing siding where the inspector had removed a panel to photograph the electrical work behind it. The renovation that was supposed to cost $22,000 had now cost Brock his mortgage, his marriage, and the one brother who had been willing to help. I snapped the chalk line, clean and straight. The way my first boss taught me. Measure twice. Cut once. Never put your name on something you did not build. I unclipped the tape measure and held it for a second. 16 years on my belt. Cracked housing. Still retracts clean. Then I clipped it back and started digging the first post hole while Felix lined up the next mark. We built it in 2 weekends. No permits needed for a patio. No crew. Just 2 guys and a truck. And it was level.